Hi, I'm Oz here with the HD800 S. Now, I last showed a video of Axel Grell announcing these at the Tokyo Fujiya ABIC Headphone Festival last year, and since then I've managed to borrow a pair and have a listen. But before I talk about these, I'd like to talk about the good old HD800s. Now, these came out in CES in 2009, which makes them 7 years old now. And back then, the headphone world was a vastly different place. Other than things like Beats, we had high-end headphones. There weren't that many around. The last major high-end headphones that had been around were the Sony R10s and Sony Qualias, and they were now been discontinued, and the price had been slowly going up and up and up as the second-hand availability became more scarce. Now, if you wanted a serious pair of high-end headphones, you had to invest in stacks, which meant buying a whole amp system and what have you to go along with it. Now, the only other high-end headphone attempt was by Ultrasone with the Edition 9s. They came out, and the main feature of those was kind of fancy metal and fancy leather, and you can buy much the same pair of headphones for half the price now in their Signature series. But it was a very big deal when these came out at $1,500, as they were the first true top-end flagship to be announced. Now, they were a surprise because you expect a top-end flagship to be, say, like the R10s, where you have the fancy wood and all the metal and the fancy case and all that. And these are plastic, albeit very carefully selected plastic to damp resonances. And the design was looked more like a Sony design. I mean, if you've seen Qualias and you've seen the SA5000s, they have the big open ear cup and the vented back here. And so there was a very radical departure from the usual kind of HD600, HD650 design, which had been pretty much the top of the line dynamic headphones available. Now, when the thing is, with these compared to, say, the Sony R10s, the R10s are either a kind of fairly neutral, fairly warm pair of headphones, depending on which model you get. There were kind of bass light and bass dark versions, and I did manage to compare it. I think it was a bass heavy pair with a pair of HD800s some years ago, and the differences are quite radical. Now, these are quite a bit brighter and quite a bit more spacious sounding in many respects, but to make sense of the HD800 S, I'd like to go over some of the details of the frequency response of these headphones. Now, if we look at dynamic driver headphones in general, they tend to have something, if you start with the bass, they tend to have a mid-bass hump. That is, the mid-bass tends to be somewhat emphasized to make up for the fact that you've got something on your ears and you don't have that thump going on around you get from speakers. Now, as that bass gets towards the deep bass, they tend to have something of a roll-off. And the reason for that is if they don't have that roll-off, the deep bass starts to distort very noticeably. Now, through the mid-range, depends on the manufacturer's tuning. If the manufacturer likes very mid-forward sound, like Audio-Technica do, which bring the voices and instruments forward, that's how they tune that. If they like it somewhat recessed, well, that's how they tune that again. Now, the HD800s, because they have a very large driver, manage to have fairly good deep bass response, even not quite as strong as, say, as a planar magnetic, which went around at the time. However, through the mid-range, they're a bit recessed. Because of those large cups, it tends to push the mid-range back a bit. Now, the treble is where things get very interesting. Most dynamic driver headphones have a treble peak of between 8 to 10 kilohertz, and that gives those instruments, which around 2 to 3 kilohertz, some kind of sense of air and space and make them sound a little bit more realistic. If you don't have that treble peak in there, you end up with something like a pair of V-motors, which sound very muffled when you listen to acoustic music. But then again, V-motors are designed for DJs listening to club music, and it's a bit of a different situation altogether. So, the thing about the HD800s was they have a treble peak at 6.3 kilohertz, and that ended up being quite troublesome for a lot of music, especially stuff that was kind of brighter mastered and more modern music. With acoustic music, it's absolutely lovely. You get a sense of space, you get a sense of detail of the instruments. But for example, I like listening to the Cowboy Junkies, and so the first time I listened to good old Sweet Jane, it came through as Sweet Jane, which was very irritating. So that caused a lot of controversy with members and people talking about and listening with them, because it seemed to limit to a degree the kind of music you could listen to. So that set people out modifying the headphones to improve the sound. They're of course recabling them, and for various reasons I won't get into now, I prefer them with a aftermarket cable, not the stock cable. But they also set people out into modifying them. But to get into that, let me bring them up close to the camera and show you what's inside the cups. So here are my HD800s, and if you look inside the cups, you'll see there's a kind of dust cover of sorts. Now this dust cover seems to be more than just a dust cover, because if you look close to the camera, on the back it may have a thin layer of material which has very tiny holes in it, I guess to avoid dust. But on the ear side it has a kind of interesting weave with larger holes in it. Now the theory that I guess what's going on here is to a degree this is designed to damp reflections inside the cups. Now the problem with reflections inside the cups, if you look inside the actual cups, you'll see there's you might have got foam around the ring that's around the metal ring around the driver. So there's a metal ring there, and they've got all this metal mesh here, and you've got all this plastic in here, and all that's lovely environment for reflecting stuff, for reflecting the sound inside that chamber when it's on your head and mushing up the sound. So I guess to some degree that this fairly inert piece of woven plastic is designed to some degree to damp internal reflections. Now, what other people have found is if they put similar kind of materials in there, such as good old non-slip matting, which I've cut out a shape here. One of the original shapes was to cover just the metal ring and the bit of plastic on the side. If they put something like in these inserts in here, which kind of have a similar pattern of holes there, but probably damp the vibrations a bit better, the sound tends to sharpen up and become more precise. And there are kind of 3D acoustical measurements of this and what have you. And the effect when listening is that the imaging of the headphones, while it doesn't change frequency response so much, is that the lower number of reflections seem to make the listening generally more pleasant, and the precision of like the instrument separation and the ability to hear where the sound is coming from tends to be more accurate. Now, some people don't like this. Now, but why wouldn't we like more accuracy? Well, when I'm speaking to you now inside a room with 4 walls and windows and what have you, and a lot of the sound you're hearing, even through my good old shotgun mic, is actually coming from the walls and not directly from me. It's actually the sound when you listen to someone talking, or in a room, for example, a lot of the sound you're hearing is the sound that's bouncing off the walls. And the same thing when you go to a concert. If you have a really good concert hall, it's designed to bounce the sound well into the audience, so they get a feeling for the music. A cheaper venue, say like a good old club or pub, wouldn't have such wouldn't be so well acoustically tuned. So you're going to hear a lot of sound coming from all directions and a lot of distortion and noise and what have you. And I remember going to a concert once and thinking, gee, I can't wait to hear this on the DVD where all that distortion is gone. Now, if you've ever been inside an anechoic chamber which damps all the reflections, which I have, and you have someone else is in there with you, when they talk to you, you hear the sound only coming very directly, as if it's just come straight out of their mouth and into your ear. And it's a very freaky experience. When I was a child in elementary school or primary school, I used to be in a boys' choir, and occasionally we had to practice in the recording studio of the School of Music. And that room had perf board walls and had a fair amount of sound damping, although not a huge amount. But in there's kind of the damped sound was kind of very freaky and unnatural sounding. So in general, we're actually used to hearing reflections off the surrounding walls and what have you, whether it be listening to someone talk or going to a concert listening to music. So in that, when you overdamp things, like if you go into a studio and you hear like a well-damped studio and you hear the music, it's a very different experience to hearing it out live. I remember, I think there was an Alicia Keys track I have, and you could hear on a high-end system, you could hear that she was standing in one of those, those voice recording boxes, which is very well damped, and you could hear that very clearly that she was basically in this small box singing into a microphone. And it was very kind of weird hearing that when on a high-res system, because most of the time people will be playing back on cheap headphones or on the radio or what have you. So in that, some people have put these tried these inserts and what have you. They found that the overdamping, actually they didn't like it as much as hearing the more kind of diffuse sound you get when you just have the stock insert in here. Now that's what's interesting, because this is where the HD800 S comes in. Now the HD800 S, if I compare the drivers, and we'll see if I can hold this up to the camera in a way where you can see it clearly, because there's got a light at a particular angle here. I think if I hold it at this particular angle, you can see, ignoring the fact that I've got foam across the ring, you want to see the very center. Now the very center of the driver of HD800, you will see, now if you don't remember, the HD800 has a ring radiator driver, and that means that the actual driver is not a full flat disc, but the center part has a big hole in it. It's quite a unique design. It's been used in speakers before, but I think this is the only pair of headphones that uses it at present. So basically that hole in the middle, that goes straight through to the back. There's no driver in there. So now if we look at the HD800 S, you will see something different. Yes, there's a hole, but there's something else in there. Something that looks rather like a donut. Now what the heck is that? Now what we think that it is a Helmholtz resonator. What the heck is a Helmholtz resonator? Well, the idea is that certain size chambers will absorb or emphasize, depending on the design, certain frequencies because a frequency has a wavelength, and the wavelength will echo in various different ways, and especially if you have a chamber that matches the wavelength. There are certain things will happen, and this is way above my pay grade, so I won't try and explain it too well. But the idea is that you can, let's say that 6.3 kilohertz peak that annoy people so much. I guess what's happened is they've put this, what effectively acts as a Helmholtz resonator in there, and measurements and listening have both shown that the 6.3 kilohertz peak is lower in the HD800 S. Now, the other consequence of the design, which I'm not entirely sure is just due to this, is that the lower bass has gone up. Now, both in two different ways. First of all, the amount of lower bass has gone up, and also the amount of distortion has gone up, because if you remember I said dynamic drivers tend to distort in the lower bass if that is too high. So the consequence of this is that the sound is somewhat different to the HD800s. So those people who did all those damping and fiddling and whatever mods may be more interested in owning a pair of these, which are tuned less for, I suppose, technical perfection and more for a kind of euphoric sound, which leads me into my impressions. So I listened with the HD800S, and at first when I listened with them, I couldn't listen for long. It felt like something was wrong. And it wasn't a tonality thing because, they're a little bit warmer than the HD800s. The treble's a little bit down, the bass is up a bit. But, it's no more different than, say, if I listened to a pair of HD800s through a nice warm-sounding tube amp, say like Audio's WA8, which I reviewed recently. So it took me listening to a few different tracks and a few different albums to try and figure out what was going on. And what really struck me was Macy Gray's latest album, Stripped, which you can get on Chesky Records through HD Tracks. It's a binaural album, and so Macy Gray's, singing in the middle, and then you have instruments out to the sides. So if you're listening with most headphones, the instruments are out here. With HD800s and the HD800S, they're kind of more out here even. And the thing was, you have Macy Gray, and then you have the kind of echo of a voice coming off the venue around in most headphones, and then you have the instruments, out here as blobs. It's kind of very left-right recording for some reason. Now, with the HD800S, Macy Gray was like here. The sound was coming directly towards me, like as if I saw someone singing to me in an anechoic chamber, or as if you've got a recording where they've recorded some instruments and added the vocals in afterwards, but those vocals were sung in like an overdamped studio, recording box where the singers sing with just a microphone, and that kind of made it like even more emphasis. Macy Gray instruments, not Macy Gray and instruments, but that middle part where between the instruments seemed to be missing, and it was a kind of very odd and disconcerting effect, and till my brain got used to that kind of sound. With other kinds of music, it wasn't such a big issue, but very sharp stereo image sound, especially binaural recordings, seemed a little bit odd to me, as if they were like I was talking about before, overdamped. So, as I said before, when you have a room that's overdamped, it kind of seems that the sound seems two directional. Now you can hear again the echo of my voice off my room through the microphone here. But imagine if I took that all away and just had a very, very direct microphone and foam on my walls. You'd only hear my voice and none of that echo. It's like a lot of that echo was taken away in the recording. But overall, they were still very HD800 characteristic headphones. There are two schools of thought, extreme schools of thought in listening. They have the people who go for the low distortion, very flat, very pure, sounding solid state amps, and nothing but the facts kind of listening, and then there are people who will go for the lush sounding warm tube amps and old school digital to analog converters and that kind of thing, who prefer, or maybe even non-oversampling style, who prefer like a kind of very musical feeling sound, even if it's kind of technically compromised. And these, in that case, instead of having the technically compromised amp or DAC, you have the technical compromisation inside the headphones themselves. But that compromise is kind of much the same effect as over-damping HD800s. You get a very, very, very precise stereo image, but it kind of sounds a little bit unnatural. So in that sense, I still really like the HD800 S with a lot of stuff where recently I felt like listening with the HD800s, and so I was in the mood really to listen to these, and in that kind of mood, other headphones, say like the Mr. Speaker's Ether, sound a little bit dark to me when I'm in that kind of mood. And the HD800s, HE1000s are kind of spot on. They were quite close, although with quite close in sound to the kind of tone in these, a little bit different in different areas. But so overall, the effect is, if you thought the H800s were too bright, and rather than buying a compromised amp, you'd rather compromise the headphones, then you might like these. But I would find them, with acoustic music, they were a little bit odd for me, but not so much that I couldn't enjoy listening regardless. But still an interesting choice for a Sennheiser to come out with them. So I was really glad to be able to borrow these and have a listen, and I hope that what I had to say about them was interesting. If you did like the video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more, please subscribe, as I'll be doing some hopefully more regular videos in the near future.